It's a real pleasure for me to introduce to you Senator Bill Bradley from Crystal City.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back in Missouri. And let me just say that, I played against John Havlicek, Billy Cunningham, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Mike Pratt was the best player I ever played against. Maybe. But I am so pleased to be here. And the reason I'm here, of course, is because my old friend Dick Cook, who was a track coach at Crystal City, I think 6 state championships, is a good friend of Mike's. And I didn't know Mike was in his current position, so Dick called me up and said, Mike's the chair of this organization, and we'd like you to come, but I'd like to ask you a few questions. So I said, okay, what? He said, do you believe in free speech? And I said, absolutely. So Dick said, well, you're going to give one. So here we are. For what? Anyway, that's the way it is. But I do want to salute Mike for his service as a coach, his special role in young people's lives, for his role as administrator, assistant principal, and now the position that many of you have, which is on the school board of your local communities. I can think of no other position that expresses the devotion to your fellow citizen more than being on the school board. Parenthetically, my father in Crystal City was the treasurer of the school board for 25 years. So I just want to salute all of you and tell you that I'm very happy to be here. Let me begin by telling you a story. I was, for a number of years, 10 years, I made my living in drafty arenas wearing short pants all across America, and played with the New York Knicks, and we played the Boston Celtics back-to-back Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. And we lost both games. And the following week, I got a letter from a crowd. I just got a letter, and the letter said, Bradley, look, we don't like you losing. And I just want to let you know that. And so I wrote back to the guy and I said, and he signed his name, Joe Pell. And because he signed his name, I wrote back to him, I said, Dear Joe Pell, look, we don't like to lose any more than you do. We're doing the best we can. And by the way, he said, he had told me earlier, you're going to come to your house and kill your dog, right? But I said, and by the way, Joe Pell, I don't have a dog. Well, you can guess what happened. The UPS truck pulled up in front of our house, and the guy got out of the UPS truck. He was carrying a big box, puts the box down on the front steps. My wife comes to me and says, Bill, what is this box out there with a dog in it? And I look outside, there's a box. Inside the box is a dog, and outside the box is an envelope, and outside the envelope it says, from Joe Pell. And I open the envelope, and there's a note inside. The note says, Bradley, don't get too attached to this dog. Which I always thought was pretty good advice for a politician, right? Don't get too attached to your job because the public might have something else to say. People ask me, what do I miss about not being in politics? And I really miss a couple of things. One is I miss not doing public policy 24 hours a day. I love that. And I try to fill that void by writing books about the country, culture, and the economy, politics. And the second thing I miss are the people, because when you're a politician, you're the recipient of a lot. Recipient of dreams, angers, hopes. And so to fill that void, I have the radio show on Sirius XM Radio, I think 24 every Sunday morning in the Central Time Zone, called American Voices. And in this program, I interview people in America about their lives, and there are two kinds of interviews. One is an interview about somebody that has an unusual job, like a public health nurse in the Aleutian Islands, or a groundskeeper at Fenway Park, or a farmer in Nebraska, or a guy that washes skyscraper windows in New York City. And all of those interviews are really about the dignity of work and how whatever you do, if you do it well and you like it, you have a sense of self-fulfillment. And that's true, I think, important for all of us to remember. The second kind of interview I do is with someone who's doing something selfless in their communities. For example, there's a guy that shined shoes at the Pittsburgh Children's Hospital for 46 years. And out of every tip that he got, he put a portion of that into a fund to pay for poor kids' health care. And the day I interviewed him, he'd put over $100,000 into that fund. Or like the guy in Nashville that goes to weddings and asks if he could have the flowers. And he has the flowers, he repurposes them, and he takes them to people who are sick in hospitals. And he got to be very well known in the hospitals. And one day he walked in and he had flowers, and the head nurse said, you know, there's a lady at the end of the corridor who is 92, and I don't think she's going to last this week, so if I make your first delivery there. So he walks into the room with the flowers, and he gives them to the woman who's lying in bed. And she said, oh, no, that can't be for me. I said, no, they said, this is for you. We brought you these flowers. Oh, impossible. No, ma'am, these are the flowers for you. And he puts them down on the bed table and looks at her, and she has a tear running down her cheek. And she says to him, that's the first time a man ever gave me flowers. And those are the kind of stories. Now, I'll tell you one more. A woman outside Chicago, she had a great Chicago accent, right? And she had a son who was dying of cancer. And in the hospital, he got a lot of letters when he was getting chemotherapy. When he came out and he got home, he didn't get any letters. So he said to his mother one night, Mom, are they not sending me letters because they think I'm going to die? And so his mother started sending him letters. On a good week, when he was in the hospital, she sent him one letter. I mean, when he was at school, she sent him one letter. And a bad week, when he was at home, he got three letters. And one day she walked into the kitchen, and he was at the kitchen table writing. And she tried to see, no, not for you, Mom. So he finishes writing, puts it in an envelope, and says, and she signed all of her letters that she would send to him, because when he said that, are they not sending me letters, she started sending him letters. And she would sign the letters, a secret pal. And so when she came in and saw him writing, and then he wouldn't let her see, he rolled this up, gave her an envelope, and said, would you give this to my secret pal? And so she put him to bed, and you know, what would you do as a mom, right? You come back out, you look at the letter, opened it, and it was one sentence. And it said, I love you, Mom. And about 4 weeks later, he died. And she went into his closet to do the most difficult thing that any mother can do, which is to try to clean up after a deceased child. And in the floor of the closet, she found a shoebox. In the shoebox were all of the letters from his secret pal organized chronologically. And then she found in the bottom of that box was an address book with all the kids that went to the Kids with Cancer camp that he attended the previous summer. And so she began writing them letters as a tribute to her son, trying to buck them up like she tried to buck her son up. An amazing thing happened. She started getting responses saying, thank you for writing to my son. Could you write to my cousin who's in Omaha? I have another friend who's in Buffalo. Could you? So she began writing letters. The more letters she wrote, the more people were requesting. And so she formed an organization, and over 10 years, she wrote 4,000 letters to kids with cancer all across this country. And that is what I call, when I ran for office, president, the goodness of the American people. And I think, quite frankly, whether it's the shoeshine guy in Pittsburgh or the guy in Nashville or the mother in Chicago, that's really the foundation of our country. And I think that should be the foundation of our politics, but I'm not here today to talk about politics. I'm here today to talk about education, because Mike told me to talk about education. So I want to talk about what I see are the three challenges out there for education today in the country. One of them is pretty obvious, and that is we live in a very competitive world, and we're competing with other countries on economic grounds. So what we do in math and science and computer science is enormously important. Whether we have the young people who are advanced enough and interested enough to take artificial intelligence to the next level or machine learning to the next level will depend on what happens in our schools. Also, what happens in our schools will determine whether the kids can actually understand the imaginative literature of our society, our history. I mean, kids ask me, well, what do I want to do? What can I do to get into politics, become a senator? I said, well, learn how to write an English sentence, and then a paragraph, and understand the imaginative literature of your country. And it seems to me that this is kind of the basic work of what all your schools do every day. And the extent to which they do it well will accrue to all of our benefits. There's a guy who was the founder of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew. He once told me, the 21st century will be determined by talent. And he said, the Chinese have a population of 1.4 billion, so they have a talent pool of 1.4 billion. So that's what we're up against. And that means that every kid cannot be left behind. No kid can be left behind, and every kid has to realize their potential if we as a country are going to maintain our living standards and are going to maintain our life. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that I think that schools need to talk about the history and practice of our democracy. That's where you learn about this, or where you should learn about this enterprise that we have in America of representative democracy. And since the founding of our country, democracy has produced enormous progress in literacy rates, higher living standards, higher life expectancy. That's all because we, the people, created a society and a government that would assist people to achieve that objective. But democracy guarantees progress, I think, but it doesn't guarantee permanence. For example, the Emancipation Proclamation lost to Jim Crow. After the Vietnam War, we lost our moral position in the world. And I think the labor movement lost to the deep pockets of business. So the terminal illness of democracy, including our own democracy, is the silence and inattention of good people. And I think that, the future is ours to shape, no question about that. But we have to want to shape it. In 2016, 100 million Americans over 18 did not vote. 40 million weren't even registered. 50 million who were registered didn't vote. So we can shape our future if we choose to do it. And that's where I think our education system is so important. To be able to talk about, well, what is our government? How does it work? What has it done over years? What has it done? What has our democracy done to try to create and successfully create these high living standards or life expectancy or literacy rates? What was it in our history that led us to where we are now? And if you want to shape your future, then you need to get busy doing the necessary work of a citizen. Not simply the rights of citizenship, but the responsibilities of citizenship, which I think fundamentally is voting in this country. People, my vote doesn't count. Well, if enough people say your vote doesn't count and they don't vote, then you've abdicated to the people who want to benefit from the system themselves and not benefit all of us. So I think that this is a very, very important role for our schools in this country today. Because America is at its best when an idea is joined with a can-do spirit. I mean, problems in this country are inevitable. They're inevitable. And sometimes they're very urgent. But they can be solved with rationality and with empathy and drive. And so the key thing also in this is getting a sense of what the country's all about. In 1992, the U.S. Olympic basketball team was the dream team, won the Olympics by an average of 40 points a game, and it was an amazing experience. After that, the program kind of went in a downturn, and both in terms of players taking it seriously, conducting themselves well, and in terms of performance. And we ended up, I forget, 2004, I think, with the bronze medal in the Olympics, not the gold medal. And so Jerry Colangelo, who's a great basketball executive, decided, I'm going to do something about it, started USA Basketball, got Mike Krzyzewski, who was the coach at Duke, to be the coach, and they set out to select a team. And when they selected a team, the purpose was to get the players to understand the enormous honor it was to represent our country in the Olympic Games. So to do that, they tried a lot of different things. And Krzyzewski, ever creative, decided one day that he was going to take the team to the Arlington National Cemetery. And he was going to go to section 40, which is where the recent veterans are buried from Iraq and Afghanistan. And so the team gets out of the bus and they walk up into Arlington. As many of you have experienced, it's one of this very emotional just being there. And they see one soldier, a solitary soldier, standing before a grave with his head bowed. And so Krzyzewski goes up to him and says, do you mind talking to our players about your experience and what you think about the country? And so in extemporaneous, this young soldier talked to these players about the country and his experience and what it meant and how. And afterwards, they were all in tears. And Krzyzewski saw that, and he said to them, that's why I brought you here today. I want you to feel our country. And that is so critical. Feel our country. Sure, grateful to veterans. But I remember, when I was a senator at the end of the Cold War, I knew a lot of Russians. And so when they came to this country, I would always try to give them an exposure to what the United States is. In fact, one of the things that I did that I look back on most fondly was create a program where over 20 years, 25,000 Russian high school students came to live with American families for a year. The premise was the best way to learn about America is live with American families and go to an American public school, right? And the best way to learn about Russia is from the kids. And so I would take Russian legislators to the Jefferson Memorial. We hold these truths to be self-evident, right? That all men, people, are created equal. And I wanted them to sense and read the words on the wall written by one of the founders. And we walked up the steps one day, and I did this a number of times. I had about 8 or 9 with me. And who would be coming down the steps that night but a Supreme Court Justice, Byron Whizzer White, who had his group of people that he took to the Jefferson Memorial that night so they could read the words on the wall. America's an idea connected to the can-do spirit. And there was the idea. Or just 2 years ago, I had a large business group that was in Washington. But I wanted these Russians to feel America. I had a large business group, and I took them to the Lincoln Memorial at night. And we walked up those steps, and here was this imposing statue of Lincoln. And then to the right are the words of the second inaugural, one of the great speeches ever made in America. And in that speech, the country's still at war. Soldier died on both sides, and Lincoln's been the president, and he's now speaking to a divided nation. And the great words in there, with malice toward none and charity for all. And I wanted them, and these guys, English, Swiss, Germans, they read this and they sat there, they were moved. I wanted them to feel our country with malice toward none, charity for all. Not a bad way to think about politics, even. He was the president in a country at war, and he was saying that. This is what we might be able to say about a person of another party, with malice toward none and charity for all. And I think that this feeling the country begins in schools where people learn the practice and the history of American democracy. It's an enormous responsibility and opportunity for all schools in Missouri and in this country. So then the third area that I want to briefly talk about, if one is getting the basic skills, science, math, liberal arts, to compete in the world and understand yourself and your imaginative literature, and the second is about democracy, its history and practice. What's the third area? And the third area, I would say, are the teaching of values. Now, loaded, what do I mean by teaching values? Just a couple of values. One is passion, right? Every kid in every school, to find that magic thing that unlocks the imagination and passion of that kid to do this activity or that activity, to commit themselves. I remember I was playing with the Knicks, and we played in Chicago one night, and after we went to a party, a couple of us, and at the party a guy came up to me and said, "I'm a lawyer, and I think I know how you feel playing basketball." And I said, "Oh, why?" He said, "Because when I was in college, I played the trumpet. And I was a really good trumpet player. We had a great audience. We had a great band. And toward the end of college, we had offers to turn pro. But my father thought I shouldn't do that. And so I went to law school." And I said, how do you like the law? He said, "It's fine, but nothing like playing the trumpet." In other words, find your trumpet, and every kid in your school, find the trumpet that kid wants to play for the rest of his life, or at least for the next decade, or at least till there's something else that captures his mind and spirit. So the second then is discipline. It's an old story, right? I mean, discipline is not new. Put it in a modern context, Malcolm Gladwell wrote this book, Outliers, where he had the rule of 10,000 hours. If you're really going to be good at something, you've got to do it 10,000 hours, right? And I think of that, and I think of a friend of mine who's a professor at the University of Chicago Business School, won a Nobel Prize in finance, economics. And when he writes an article, he does 200 drafts of the article. Reminds me of Paul Simon's song, Rewrite, right? Rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. That takes discipline. Or maybe there's this crazy kid in Crystal City, right? Who from age 13 to age 18 decides he really wants to be a great basketball player because he goes to Ed Macaulay's basketball school when he's 14. And Ed Macaulay says to the assembled campers, "Remember, if you're not practicing, somebody somewhere is practicing. And given roughly equal ability, if you ever meet, he's going to win." And then that camper says, "Well, I'm not going to lose because I didn't practice." And so he goes 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday, 5 hours on Saturday and Sunday, 9 months a year, to be the best player that he can be. So discipline is so critical. It's a value. It's taught. Third, selflessness. Selflessness is something that, is all these great people I talk about on my radio program who are doing something selfless in their community. The woman that wrote the letters, the guy that brought the flowers, the guy that shined shoes and put money in kids' health care pots. Selflessness is so important. And if you look at sports, on a basketball team, a player, even if it's Mike Pratt, is only 1 point on a 5-pointed star. And no one player can be as good as all players can be together. And when you win a championship, it creates a bond that lasts for a lifetime, and it's a bond that selflessness created. Because you don't win an NBA championship being selfish. You only win an NBA championship by being unselfish. And so I look at this and I say, what's the relevance? Okay, selflessness. Is this some kind of soft issue? No, it's not soft at all. Because if you look at the future and what people say about how the economy is evolving, they're saying that our economy will be determined by teams of teams. And if you are in a team of people working on a problem, right? What's the key element of that? It's empathy. It's the ability to listen to what your fellow team members are saying. And so the more we can teach that in schools, that empathy, that understanding, that listening capacity, the more it's going to benefit our whole economy and all of us as a country. And then the fourth one is imagination, right? How do you teach that? Well, probably a lot of teachers in your schools know how to teach it. But first of all, you have to accept the fact that there are people, and they should be encouraged to have an idea of a different way to do something. Somebody said, we ought to have a PC, not a mainframe. Or we ought to have an iPhone. Or we ought to have penicillin. And they invented something out of their imagination. But the best story I ever heard about the effect of imagination being directly applicable to the activity was a story about a guy named Dick Fosbury. Dick Fosbury was a high jumper. I don't know if most of you don't look old enough to remember Dick Fosbury. I do. And he was a high jumper in the 1960s. And up until Fosbury, the idea is the way you high jump is you jump with your stomach over the bar and you go over. And that was the orthodoxy. That's the way I tried to do it in high school, not very successfully, but that's the way it was done. But Fosbury said, I think I'm going to jump with my back over the bar. Coach said, no, not possible. You jump with your stomach. I want to just try to jump with my back. So he jumped with his back over the bar, and when he won the Olympic gold medal in 1968, no one ever jumped with their stomach over the bar again because of Fosbury's imagination. Is there a Dick Fosbury in one of your schools? Maybe not a high jumper, maybe a poet, maybe not a high jumper, maybe somebody who just captivated with a math issue. That is what should be nurtured. And that passion and imagination play right together. Then the last thing that I would say in terms of values that I think education should promote, teach, is hard because this is also taught at home, as all these values are taught. But you're given the opportunity to have them in your control for 8 hours a day, 7 hours a day, and that's your opportunity, is integrity. Integrity. That's the foundation for everything. Is there a right and there's a wrong? You do the right. That's very simple. Another little athletic anecdote, Larry Bird. Larry Bird was a great basketball player for the Boston Celtics, came out of Indiana. And on 1992, he was on that dream team I was talking about earlier. But he was at the end of his career, and his back was giving him all kinds of trouble. And he had a contract that said that if he didn't execute his retirement before August 15th, that he would have an automatic 2-year renewal on his contract at $4.5 million a year. So Larry Bird came to the head of the Boston Celtics in July and said, you know, Dave, I've been back in French Lick. I've been trying to get my back in shape, but I can't get it in shape. I think I'm going to retire. Dave Gavitt, who was the president of the Celtics at the time, said, knowing what he meant to Boston, knowing what he meant to the organization, said, Larry, why don't you take 3 weeks and think about it, right? Get past that August deadline. And Bird's eyes narrowed, and he looked at him and he said, look, Dick, if I know I can't play, I'm not taking the money. And he left $9 million on the table. Now that's integrity. So when I look at all of you and the great service you're providing to your communities, and think about the education of this country, I think of those 3 things. Getting the most out of your kids in terms of them knowing about math, science, liberal arts. Teaching the history and practice of democracy and the how-to of democracy. At a minimum, voting. And the third, teaching these values. Buttressing what's taught at home about passion, discipline, selflessness, imagination, integrity. If 1 or 2 or 3 of those drop it from home, then the school picks that up. It's an enormous opportunity and joy, I think, to be involved with young minds and to see them grow and to see them listen to you. I mean, here's Dick Cook. People come up to him, and all of you, former students. He had an affair. 300 of his former students had an affair in Crystal City just a few months ago. Because that's the impact teachers make. That's the impact board members make. And so I would simply plead with you to pause about that great story about the 3 stonecutters. It's the Middle Ages, and people were building a big cathedral, and they put big stones on top of each other. And they asked one person who was doing that, well, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm cutting a stone, and I cut it here, and I put it there, and, it's drudgery, and at least I get a little money, and okay. Ask the next one, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm putting stones, cutting them. I like cutting them, and I put them right on there, and I get paid, and I take care of my family. Ask the third stonecutter, what are you doing? And the third stonecutter said, oh, I'm building a holy lighthouse that will last 1,000 years. So as board members, which of those lighthouses, which one of those stonecutters are you? And my bet is most of the people in this room are the third stonecutter. Thank you very much.